What's this thing? No? Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Carol Finn, President of the American Geophysical Union. The world we live in is changing rapidly, and each day brings new challenges to overcome and new opportunities to take advantage of. Issues like natural hazards, the availability of clean water and other natural resources, and the impacts of climate change are having a significant effect on economies, communities, and families all around the world. So as scientists, we're drawn to finding solutions for these global challenges and working together to build a more sustainable future for us all. In fact, a sustainable future is part of AGU's vision. That's why I'm so happy that you all have joined us for the 2014 Agency Lecture. What better place could there be to talk about how we can use our science to tackle the greatest challenges facing our society? Fall meeting is about innovation and discovery, promoting interdisciplinary collaboration, and forging new partnerships. It's about finding new ways to look at the world and to use our science for the benefit of humanity. In keeping with that theme, I am so pleased to be able to introduce today's speaker. On April 12, 2013, Sally Jewell was sworn in as the 51st Secretary of the Interior. The Department of the Interior serves as the steward for approximately 20% of the nation's lands. This includes national parks, national wildlife refuges, and other public lands. They also oversee the responsible development of conventional and renewable energy resources on public lands and waters. In nominating Secretary Jewell, President Obama said, "She is an expert on the energy and climate issues that are going to shape our future. She knows the link between conservation and good jobs. She knows that there's no contradiction between being good stewards of the land and our economic progress." Please join me in welcoming U.S. Secretary of the Interior and my boss's 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 boss, Sally Jewell.
Well, thank you so much, Carol, for not just your work at the USGS, which is terrific, but also your work and your volunteer stewardship for the American Geophysical Union. I can't think of a better place to be today or a nicer city to be in than San Francisco, and it's raining outside, or at least drizzling, which is really good for San Francisco right now, so I hope you guys are all enjoying this weather that has been rare here lately. But it's great to be here, and thank you, Carol. I also want to thank Chris McEntee for her work as Executive Director of the AGU. She's been in the position for a long time. It's clear from the number of scientists that you have attending this event, 24,000, that the AGU has done a really terrific job of being relevant to scientists from all over the world. So it's a privilege to be with you today. I want to give a special shout out to my colleague in the front row, Suzette Kimball. She is running the USGS. She has been for as long as I have been in this job, which is a little over a year and a half. She was nominated by President Obama to be the director of the USGS, and she's one of those unfortunate people that the Senate has yet to confirm. So let your members of Congress know that Suzette needs to get confirmed, would you? It's ridiculous. She's a non-controversial nominee, and I think that's why she has it, yeah. Thanks, Suzette. And I also want to give a shout out to my colleague from a sister agency, the Department of Commerce and NOAA. Kathy Sullivan, I think, did a great job, it sounds like, in addressing this group yesterday. She is a friend and a partner in this endeavor, and it is so wonderful to have a scientist of her caliber working in a position as head of NOAA, because we work together collectively on so many things. So as she talked about building resilient communities, and she talked to you about environmental intelligence, I can tell you that we are joined at the hip in recognizing how important both of those things are to the future of our ecosystems in this country at a time of a changing climate. So thank you for everything that you do to shape public policy through your work, to help identify the most pressing environmental issues of our time. So today what I want to do is share a few things with you. One is the importance that scientific research has on shaping sound public policy. One is on the shared commitment that we have collectively across the academic sector, the government sector, and the private sector to understanding and developing climate science and working on solutions. And then I've got a little homework assignment for you. There's going to be a few asks at the end of this that I hope you'll join me in taking up the mantle on. So I just want to say that science has been an important part of who I am as an individual and my life as a young person. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest and, like all children, had a natural curiosity. All children are born with that natural curiosity. Mine was nurtured by my parents and by teachers and by the opportunity to play outside and explore, by the opportunity to work by my father in the basement making Heath kits. Any of you make Heath kits out there? The younger, quite a few of you, and the rest of the people are a generation younger than us. But I learned how to solder when I was like 8 or 9 years old and learned how to make oscilloscopes and those things that you could do with Heath kits. I learned how to make inventions in the backyard, and I learned about failure, that some of my inventions didn't work. But I grew up in an environment where that curiosity was nurtured, and so did all of you, because that's why you're scientists. That's why you're in the fields of study that you're in. That's why you're continuing to question and ask why and develop. So I have a little bit of an unusual career. I'm an engineer by training. I worked from the Alaska pipeline into oil and gas, and then I became a banker. So you might think, a banker, why is that? Well, I can tell you that the science and engineering background was enormously helpful in figuring out who was likely to pay their loans back. Very helpful. I then worked at REI. So selling backpacks, what does that have to do with science? And I'll tell you, it has a lot to do with it, because science and technology shapes all of these products that have become more lightweight and more effective, helping keep us safer and more comfortable in the great outdoors. And now at the Department of the Interior, we are dependent on science at every level. It's critical to every action we take, whether it's our oversight of land or water or wildlife, whether it's energy exploration, from offshore oil and gas to renewable energy, to conventional to unconventional. Whether it is understanding historic and cultural preservation, like one of the newest national park units that was just named as part of this National Defense Authorization Act, Public Lands Rider. Probably don't know about that stuff, but I do now. The Thule fossil beds in Nevada. Who knew that Las Vegas is sitting on top of a whole bunch of fossils? And so science helps us date those fossils, helps us understand why they're there. And with the national park status, we're going to now be able to interpret that for the public. Science guides us in our work with American Indians and Alaska Natives, our nation's first people, who oftentimes are on the front lines of the battle against climate change and know from the needs for cultural resources and from their histories and cultures that things are changing dramatically. So in everything we do, science is our North Star. And the crown jewel in that North Star, not just for us, but for the federal family, is the U.S. Geological Survey that is well represented here. If you're with the USGS, could you just raise your hand? Wow, that's great. Thank you. Of course, you all work for me, so that's why you showed up, right? How about other members of the federal family? Other people in federal, quite a number of you too. How about those of you in state and local governments, here or abroad? Okay, for all of us, can we give these public servants and scientists a round of applause for the great work they do? I will say that in this interesting political environment, it's not easy to be a scientist. It's not easy to be a public servant. It's almost a sure way to get reelected by putting public servants down. But I will tell you that I have seen your work in so many levels, and it's part of my job and your job to help people understand the importance of the work you do. I have seen and heard from local communities like this one when we had a Napa earthquake not long ago, and the USGS with its earthquake early warning system put that to work and notified people, giving them a few seconds at least to duck cover and hold on. And that will continue to progress over time. I was on vacation with my husband in Alaska before I took this job, watching bears in Lake Clark National Park in the beginnings of the Aleutian chain. And we had scientists that were staying in the same place we were staying who were flying a giant MRI machine over Mount Iliamna to understand where the magma was. They're everywhere, these scientists. I review every single day reports from the USGS on what's happening with the lava flow coming out of the Kilauea volcano that is now 9/10 of a mile away from the marketplace at the village of Pahoa and may actually cut off access to that community in Hawaii. We work with the USGS to help provide a credible, high-integrity science for things like the sage-grouse initiative we're working on with 11 Western states to understand sagebrush ecosystems and their importance, and to avert the need for listing of species as endangered because of threats to those ecosystems. And in my home state of Washington, the work of the USGS helped local disaster recovery folks understand the impact of the Oso landslide and where to look for the victims of that landslide, and how to learn from that lesson so there are fewer victims of those kinds of events in the future. And I will say that it was a good week last week. We actually got a budget. You know, in the private sector, you kind of take budgets for granted, but I don't do that anymore. So we got a budget in the federal government without even any shutdowns or anything. That was pretty amazing. For 2015, and I'm pleased that the USGS actually saw an increase in its budget. Modest increase, $13 million, but it's a step in the right direction, and that recognizes the importance of science. And we saw that in other areas of budget as well. So government plays a critically important role in science and research. Government helps translate what people need on the ground to the research that you do. And it can help pull you in certain directions, like collaboration, which is one of the things I think you're working on here at AGU as a convening organization to get a bunch of disciplines together to solve some of the biggest problems that we have on this planet. I spent 11 and a half years out of a 12-year term as a regent at the University of Washington, and had to give it up to take this job, unfortunately. But I did not, as a knowledgeable private citizen, understand the importance of federal government support for research at universities until I took on that role as a regent. And I understood what the federal government was doing in saying, we don't have as many resources as we might have before, we need you to collaborate. So it was during the time I was on the Board of Regents that we went from having individual departments in things like marine science and ocean and fisheries science and the College of Forest Resources and Earth Sciences, and wrapped them together in the College of the Environment. So as Kathy was talking yesterday about environmental intelligence, and as you're all talking about how you work together at a time of constrained resources, those are exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary things we need to think about, because the world is a complex place. So one of the great things about my job is I get to take field trips. And I was at my home mountain, Mount Rainier, one that I have enjoyed recreationally, climbing to the summit multiple times. But this time I went to the flanks of Mount Rainier with scientists from the USGS and the University of Washington and the National Park Service. And I learned that for over 100 years, they have been measuring climate and weather data consistently using the same methodology that shows us what has been happening on that mountain now for over 100 years. That is with the exception of those few days when we were shut down and we couldn't check the data, which is very frustrating. Climate is changing in that region. The glaciers are retreating. I've been seeing that and observing it from being a youngster. The first time I had an opportunity to climb the mountain, I was 16 on the summit, 15 in my first failure on climbing to the summit. And you can tell that the landscapes and the snowpack is changing dramatically. But there, the scientists not only helped me understand what's happening with glacial retreat, but also what's happening when that corset comes off the mountain and the debris is facilitated in its flow down the mountainsides. The debris flows that the mountain saw in 2006 impacted communities downstream, and it's that scientific research that helps communities prepare, not just for the kinds of debris flows we saw on Mount Rainier from a heavy storm event, but also the potential of a future eruption. There's no question that science drives a lot of the private sector work as well, not just influencing public policy. So REI, Think about REI as a place to get great gear, but where do you think a lot of that great gear originates? And I'll tell you one place it originates, and that's DARPA, the Defense Research Organization. They're working all the time on survival gear. And that survival gear helps the military, but it also translates to some great innovative, lightweight new products in the private sector that drive an industry like outdoor recreation. So most Americans, even really engaged ones, don't understand the impact that the federal government's investments have on research and on furthering knowledge and how that knowledge translates to them. And that's going to be one of the asks I make of you a little bit later on, is to help change that. So I appreciate that this fall conference and the gathering of the AGU is about gaining insights from each other. It's about sharing scientific knowledge. It's about networking. It's about learning from each other and taking those learnings and translating your research so much farther than you could go by yourself. It's important because science and government together have the power to increase public awareness and to influence policy in a way that is going to be so critical to our future survival. So I think back on my childhood. I was born in 1956. Spare you the math, I'm 58 years old. Big birthday coming up in about a year and a couple months. But we won't talk about that right now. In my childhood, it was all about space and the space race and the moonshot that was inspired by President Kennedy's comments. It also had to do with a little competition with Russia and Sputnik and not wanting to come up second. And that drove so much public investment with full public support. And it drove, of course, innovation in science, in computation, in material science that supported industries from automotive to airplanes to probably outdoor recreation as well, that fueled our economy for several decades after that point. And I would say the moonshot that we need to take now is on climate change, the defining issue of our time, and certainly something that younger generations are paying a tremendous amount of attention to. The overwhelming evidence that we can thank the IPCC for, that we can thank Al Gore for helping publicize, has helped bring attention to this and made it the defining issue of our time. Just a few months ago, the Obama administration released the National Climate Assessment, a very, very helpful tool that took the kind of stuff that you all understand as scientists and translated it into plain English and did it on a region-by-region basis, so people can now better understand, what does climate change mean to me? Is it droughts, as we have here in California, and very happy for this rain, but it's not going to offset the situation that has been going on here for a number of years? I know that Senator Feinstein said, "I fear that my state is becoming a desert." And she's right. There's a lot of evidence to show that. That National Climate Assessment took the kind of information that you've got in your posters out there, that you all understand, but lay people like myself don't understand, and it translated it into something that people really do understand. And I would say that just as Kennedy did, presidential leadership is now driving action again. I was in Australia just last month for the World Parks Congress, a gathering once every 10 years of all of the leaders of national parks and public lands from across the world, sharing information like you're sharing information with each other here. And one of the things they are most concerned about is the changing climate and its impact on the resources that they are charged with stewarding for future generations. And during that conference, the president made a joint announcement, a historic joint announcement. The two largest carbon polluters in the world, China and the United States, that they were going to reduce their carbon footprints. So I'm enormously proud of the president for stepping up to a far larger goal than we had had in the past. From our 2005 levels to 2025, reducing our carbon dioxide equivalent levels of carbon pollution by 26 to 28%. That is a dramatic change in the numbers that we have. And he didn't pick those numbers out of the air. He picked those numbers because scientists like you helped us understand a path to get there. So it was very helpful to be speaking after he did that, because it's kind of like a softball coming your way that you could hit a home run out of the park with that audience. So that's always useful when the boss sends you a softball. But we just had the climate talks in Lima, Peru, and I don't know how many of you watched those. And while there's criticism about how far it didn't go, there was universal acceptance of the fact that every country needs to step up, all of us as individuals need to step up, but that the largest countries need to lead. And I'm proud that we are, for the first time, I would say, in a very significant way, taking the leadership that we need to take to address this issue of climate change. So I want to talk about something that I would say I didn't fully understand as a private citizen that I do understand now. It's really easy to vilify the term regulation. And believe me, as a federal government agency, you are bound by all kinds of regulation and laws that makes it very difficult to move quickly. Even regulations and policies that require lots of levels of approval, like my own personal approval for everybody from the USGS to attend this conference, for example. Okay, those are regulations that are frustrating, or policies that are frustrating. But there is thoughtful regulation that has changed the face of this world, and certainly this country, particularly from environmental protections. Think about the Clean Air Act. Think about acid rain and the SOx and NOx emissions that were reduced when people said it's going to kill the utility industry, and you know what? It didn't. Think about CAFE standards in cars that set mileage standards and emission standards, and what a difference that has made to all of us in our pocketbooks in how much less we spend on gasoline, but more importantly, how much less is going into the atmosphere in the form of pollution. So today we're on the cusp of regulating another bad actor in greenhouse gases, and that is methane. So it doesn't make sense to produce oil with associated gas and vent and flare that into the atmosphere. Regulation, thoughtful regulation, worked on with industry and states side by side, can help address that. It doesn't make sense to have devices like compressors and pneumatic devices along pipeline infrastructures that just vent methane directly into the atmosphere. So thoughtful regulation can help create jobs and opportunity for industry by working over time to eliminate those devices to some that we now understand are better for the environment. So there's a lot of things we can do with thoughtful regulation, and that is a big part of what I now understand as both a regulator and a land manager is so important. So we've got to make sound science and data transparent and readily available in things like the National Climate Assessment, so that that can be used in decisions that impact people and the environment without regard to political boundaries. Because climate change and ecosystem knows no boundaries. And I will say that if you haven't read the book Merchants of Doubt, or you haven't read the film, which has just come out recently, you should, particularly as scientists. Because when data is widely available, those merchants of doubt, those few scientists that leverage media to cast doubt on the important work that's out there, they will be exposed through transparent, widely available data. And government plays a role. We can clap for that. Thank you. Government plays a really critical role in open data sharing of information. NOAA provides climate and weather data. They provide solar weather data that helps utilities and governments plan for the potential impact of solar flares on infrastructure. The USGS has a national geospatial database that gives us all kinds of useful information. In conjunction with NASA, the Landsat satellite now can help us understand things like drought through evapotranspiration measurements. Recently, the USGS talked about its ability to measure groundwater, depletion, and recharge through the use of magnetometers in space that measure slight changes in the Earth's gravitational pull because of the amount of groundwater that's present. And you know what? We don't have as much groundwater as we thought we had, and that's a concern. Not a surprise, given what's happening, but certainly a concern and something that we need to pay attention to. The USGS just released elevation mapping in the continent of Africa that will help countries around Africa deal with the potential changes from sea level rise and other factors on their coastal communities. And they're going to be releasing that elevation data for all of the continents in the country in the very near future. So sharing information widely makes every scientist and every country more successful, which is why this conference, the AGU, and 24,000 of you getting together is so important. Because you get together and you recognize the interdependencies that you have. It helps inspire you to work across disciplines. It helps you understand the complexities. And for the communicators among you, it helps you understand how to translate those complexities into things that people can understand. So this morning, Suzette and I met with Mayor of San Francisco, Mayor Lee, and we took a walk along parts of the California coast. We saw a $1.2 billion infrastructure for the city of San Francisco for wastewater treatment that is located right on the shores that are rapidly eroding in Ocean Beach. We saw the community of Pacifica, which is built right in the low point, which will become inundated in a major storm. And Patrick Barnard from the USGS, a coastal geologist, helped us understand what's happening and why, what's human-caused, like dams on the rivers that come into the Bay Delta, on mining activities that remove sand from the Bay Delta, on shipping activities and dredging, and on sea level rise combined with tectonic activity, seismic activity, combined with ocean currents and temperatures. It's complex, but it's really important for people like Mayor Lee to understand what's going on so that they can prepare the billions of dollars of infrastructure here in California for the inevitable changes that are coming with what we see on those landscapes now. So the president, in his climate action plan, called for a climate data initiative. And that is unleashing troves of open government data about our climate. And he's calling on America's innovators to leverage that data in ways that make our nation's communities and businesses more resilient, as Kathy talked about yesterday. So we released data sets earlier this year on coastal communities and on agriculture, and I've played around on the websites, and I encourage you to do the same. You probably have. I hope you have. Last week, we just announced a new tranche of data, ecosystem vulnerability and water. And that gives us information about water quality, stream flow, soil, land cover, and biodiversity. And I want to use just a little example of how we can take this massive amount of data and engage the local community in a way that makes it relevant for them. So a nonprofit organization, the Audubon Society, a university, in this case Cornell, and the ornithologists at Cornell, created a database called EBird. Where are the birds? And why are they there? When you take that eBird data and you now put it on top of the USGS land cover data database, you can see the kinds of habitat that creates habitat for migratory birds and stationary birds. If you're a city manager and you're trying to maintain a healthy ecosystem, you can, through citizen science, gain information about where the birds are, and then you can look at the USGS land cover database and figure out, is it backyard habitat that's working? Is it a wildlife refuge that's working? Is it a city park that's working? Where is the habitat good and where isn't it good? And what can I, as a public land manager, do about that? So enormously powerful, because it now engages those citizens and those bird watchers and people that really care about birds, engage with scientists to make that data really available to local land managers so they can make smart decisions. So in that vein, the USGS has 8 climate science centers that are spread out in different regions around the country. And those climate science centers help people on a local level understand their landscapes like they never have before. They provide unbiased science needed to identify strategies that foster climate change resilience in natural areas and in communities. As a land manager, whether it's the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, or my colleagues over in the USDA that have the Forest Service, we need this kind of data in order to do our jobs. I will say that we are also learning about data that's been around for time immemorial, and that is the traditional ecological knowledge that our nation's first people, American Indians and Alaska Natives, have that can be very useful when partnered up with modern science of today. So the Climate Science Center in Alaska is working with Native communities to understand historical winter conditions and current winter conditions and what is happening in terms of changes on the landscape. We're adding tribal liaison positions to 6 climate science centers to take that centuries-old traditional ecological knowledge and those on-the-ground observations and marry that up with what we know about what's happening with climate change to accelerate our knowledge even further. Thank you. So today, we're delighted that the Regional Climate Science Centers and the USGS's National Climate Change and Wildlife Science Center is awarding nearly $6 million in grants to universities and other partners for 50 new research projects. These are going specifically to prepare natural and human communities for the impacts of climate change. So as I took that walk along the bluff overlooking the California beaches, it's very clear that these coastal habitats are under great threat. So one of the grants will go to help understand connected coastal habitats so that the local communities can work on planning and conservation. Another study dealing with drought in the Colorado River Basin is helping us understand what's happening with snowpack. That reservoir, the biggest reservoir, the white one that we used to rely on for so much of our water supplies, that is now coming more in liquid form as we see warming temperatures, is changing the need for infrastructure like we have to provide at the Bureau of Reclamation. So these studies will help support research. It adds to $25 million of studies that the USGS has provided in terms of grants to organizations, and we're going to continue to do that. So I've got 3 asks for all of you to consider. First, let's work together to expand public and private partnerships. Let's leverage our resources at this time of constrained resources to make sure that we produce great science and do it in conjunction with people that can leverage it even farther. Earthquake early warning systems, like I mentioned with the Napa earthquake, leverage private cell phone systems to get the word out. That's a great example. I was in the middle of building a new home in Seattle when I got this job. I don't recommend building a home from 3,000 miles away. But I will say that my building permit leveraged USGS data so that my foundation is designed to withstand a 9.2 earthquake because I live very close to a fault. That's useful to know, and I'm really glad that the USGS provided that information to the city of Seattle so that if the big one comes along, I'll be okay. And so I joined USGS as a volunteer in their Netquakes network with a seismograph now installed in my home. So soon I will be leveraging another private industry Twitter to spread the word with my very own Seismo selfie. So you can look for that on your Twitter account. So we need to work together. That's the one ask. Work together to expand the public and private partnerships to leverage your resources, because none of us have the money that we'd like to have. We're not back in the space race where the federal government is going to pay for everything. We're not back in the New Deal where the federal government paid for the Civilian Conservation Corps and so many other public works. We got to work more creatively. And if necessity is the mother of invention, we certainly have necessity now. Second ask of you, please take credit for what you do. Please tell your friends and your neighbors and your elected officials about the importance of the work you do. Don't assume they can read your mind, because they really have no idea. They have no idea about how important your work is to their lives. And so it's up to you to help them understand that, because if we don't have a general public that understands it, we're not going to have a Congress that understands it. And if we don't have a Congress that has requests from their constituents to support the work you do, they're not going to support it, because there's plenty of requests for the money that we have in this federal budget. So please let them know. Let them know about things like the USGS did when Hurricane Sandy was approaching the East Coast, and they had the forethought to do LIDAR mapping of the coast so that when that devastating storm hit, they could look at the before and after LIDAR shots and understand what it was that protected communities and what it was that devastated communities. That information, that thoughtful run the LIDAR surveys right before the storm action, and the ability to overlay that data set has been enormously helpful to communities, and the USGS is getting credit for it. And that's the kind of thing that we need to do to make sure people know the importance of the work you do. Because the federal government produces incredibly valuable open data, but we don't get credit for it. So, next time you use Google Earth, next time you talk to a Google executive, maybe some Google people in the audience. I know there's Google users, probably all of us. But let's tell Google it would be really nice when they have Google Earth on their phone that they give credit to the USGS and NASA for Landsat, which powers that data. And we'll give them credit whenever we use Street View, because that's Google's data. How about when we were all planning for this trip and we went to the Weather Channel and we realized it was going to be raining in San Francisco, and so we planned our wardrobe accordingly. I've had people actually say to me, well, why do we need these weather satellites by the federal government when we have the Weather Channel? Where do you think the data comes from? So how about the Weather Channel, brought to you by the National Weather Service and NOAA? Wouldn't that be nice? So as a business person, the federal government is about the worst at marketing that there is, probably followed soon thereafter by most universities that don't do a very good job of talking about the work that they do. So let your elected officials, your friends, and your neighbors know about how important the federal, state, and local government investments are in their lives, because that will make a difference. So take credit for what you do. And the third ask I have of you is take responsibility for engaging the next generation. When you think about what nurtured your natural curiosity, what made you lifelong learners, what made you curious today as you were when you were 5 years old, those things that made you that way are the sorts of things you need to be doing for the next generation. So certainly for the people you love, for the people that are in your lives, yes, but also for the people who may not have access to the kinds of things that I had access to as a child, or you had access to as a child. And as I look across this audience, you are not reflective of the population of the United States. So how do we reach into communities that are not as represented in this room and make sure that those curious, smart, engaged young people know that the STEM fields are for them too? That's our job collectively. Thank you. So we're working at Interior to launch an initiative to get more kids playing. How about just play? Play outside. Play, learn in the best classroom there is, which is the one with no walls. Sorry for all of you academics, but you know, it starts with looking at what's happening in the natural world. I'm sure you relate to that. To serve, to pick up garbage, to build trails, to do those things that the CCC people did, but to do it in a way that fits with the 21st century. And yes, to work in the kinds of fields that you all have. It's our job to nurture that environmental intelligence that Kathy talked about the other day. So thank you for your work to shed light on some of the most complex issues facing our world, because there's an urgent need for trusted science information. The AGU is built on a foundation of the free exchange of information, of respect for the diversity of ideas and approaches, for accountability to the public, and for excellence and integrity. I can't think of a better set of values for the Department of Interior than those that you share at AGU. And we are committed to upholding those values as you are, and committed to sharing in the important work that you do to make our world a better place. Thank you very much.
Well, I can't thank you enough for such an inspiring talk. Obviously, we don't usually get such a large amount of spontaneous applause. So we're going to take questions. There's a press conference afterwards, so if you're with the press, please keep your questions for later. We'd like to have questions from the audience, and there are mics around the room. And when you come up, please identify yourself and say your name. I'll start over here.
Hello, Secretary Jewell. Aaron Hurtis. I'm with the Union of Concerned Scientists. My colleagues are very happy to see that the department recently updated its scientific integrity policy. I wonder if you could talk about how that fits in with your vision for transparency and data use. And importantly, can you talk about how you want to move forward in implementing that policy and empowering scientists, managers, and other employees to do their work free from political interference and speak up freely and publicly about their work? And I ask that in part because there's such a limited time left to continue to build on the scientific integrity priorities across federal science agencies.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Aaron. And actually, thank you for your organization's amplification of what we did in the scientific integrity policy in the media today, I think. Suzette Kimball, the director of the USGS, is our scientific integrity officer, and there wouldn't be a better place to go for that than the USGS within our organization. So this is an iteration of our integrity policy that has been based on the lessons we've learned by having one in place for several years. And you know, you have to walk this fine line as you think about regulations and layering on requirements. You don't want to stifle creativity, and yet you want to make sure it's done in the best possible way. And what we have done with this policy is basically extend a requirement that each of our bureaus and agencies has a scientific integrity individual so that they can work collectively on policies and programs that ensure that integrity. We're putting in place an ombudsman so that when issues of scientific integrity come up, there is a place to go that is independent. And we are making sure that people that are concerned about what they see have a place to safely come forward and share those concerns. Because, bad science, or science that does not have integrity, has the potential to undermine a tremendous amount of good science. And one of the things that I was talking about with some of the colleagues here from the AGU and the USGS was the fact that one of the biggest differences between the private sector and the public sector is in the private sector you're rewarded for taking risk. In the public sector you're penalized for taking risk. And so scientific integrity is about walking a fine line that supports new, innovative work and thought, but does it in a way where someone does not have to be concerned that their integrity is questioned because they are continuing to move science forward. So, those are a few observations from a layperson. Suzette is the expert, and we very much appreciate that she's taken all the input from the years of experience that we've had with this and has really taken it forward, and I think it's influencing other federal agencies now as well.
Terry?
I'm one of the people in the audience that's not a member of the USGS. My name is Terry Tullis. I work at Brown University, but I do sit on a couple of panels that advise the USGS on aspects related to seismology. I'm chair of one and sit on another one. So I'm going to say a few things that I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I think somebody needs to say this. The USGS is a really world-class organization with world-class scientists in it. And the image that the public often has of government employees kind of sitting around not doing anything does not describe the USGS in any way, as I'm sure you know. My colleagues at the USGS have told me, and it's been reinforced by what I've heard today, that you are the best thing for the Department of Interior and the USGS that's happened in a long time. So we're really happy you're there. You're obviously smart, you're committed, you're articulate, and that's just exactly what we need.
Thank you. Thank you.
The other thing I want to say, and again, you're, I'm sure, aware of this. Well, and I should back up and say, I realize you serve at the pleasure of the president, and he'll only be there 2 more years. I hope somehow you decide to stay those 2 years and convince whoever comes after Obama that you should stay a bit longer.
I have a new house in Seattle.
Well, you can go there on weekends.
Although it's built on a fault.
Yeah, right. And the last thing, which again you know, is that the budget of the USGS is just terrible. I mean, it's been level funded. $14 million more this year is better than now going down, but it doesn't match inflation by any means. Something needs to be done, and you are the articulate kind of person in the right place that could make that happen. So you and Suzette are a team that we really need. Good luck. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Terry.
Any more questions like that? I will say that this administration is very committed to science and research, and we have not had a favorable budget climate. 2013, my first year in this job, was really dreadful. Coming from a place like REI where people generally love working there, one of the 100 best companies to work for, into an environment where you've got indiscriminate across-the-board cuts, where you've shut the government down so that data I was talking about being collected on Mount Rainier for over 100 years continuously couldn't be collected for 3 weeks. I mean, where migratory patterns for certain wildlife that only come in October of every year through the same site, we lost a whole year's worth of data. I mean, that stuff is pathetic. And telling some of those stories is why we have a budget. Thank you. So I agree with you that we need to spend more. I get that. We need to spend more on science overall. And I also get that while it's sport for many politicians to put down federal employees, it's one of the reasons why I asked for the show of hands, because there are people doing incredibly valuable work that have not had raises that are meaningful in 5 to 10 years that are doing incredibly important work and do it because of the difference they make. So thank you for highlighting that for everybody here, and we'll keep up that fight. And I'm not going anywhere for 2 years, I'll tell you that. I didn't go through the Senate confirmation to not last for the whole 4 years.
Over here on this side.
I'm Tad Kleindienst. I'm a research scientist from the most hated federal agency that we have right now, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And I should correct you, we did have a 1% raise this year, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just touch on 3 things that you talked about and maybe put a little more meat on those bones. One thing is you mentioned the benefit we get from environmental protection. That liberal agency, the Office of Management and Budget, estimated that there's a 35-to-1 return, dollar return for environmental protection. And I'm a bit of a disciple for spreading that information.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a bunch of people lined up. So if you
Okay,
can
okay, I'm going to ask you the
quick
question then.
Thanks.
I was born in 1960. I'm close to retirement. What is your take, 1950, what is your take on hiring in federal government? And the second question is with respect to collaborations. We now have unconventional oil and gas that involves 5 federal agencies, Department of Interior, NASA, EPA, DOE, and NOAA. So we definitely need collaboration in that regard, and I'm wondering if you can address those 2 issues.
Okay, well, I'll try and do it quickly. On hiring federal employees, I've never been in an environment where it's so hard to hire somebody. We make it so difficult, and that is something the President knows about. It's something that I've talked with the Office of Personnel Management about. It is really hard to get your way through the process and get hired. And in the context of difficult regulation, the kinds of things that come into hiring preferences make it difficult for that person that has trained for so long right next to you, that is exactly the person you need for that job, to actually get that person hired is very difficult. So it is a frustration. It's something that I think people try to work around or work on, and it's certainly something that comes up with my cabinet colleagues. So I will say that with the budget being a little bit improved, I was talking to Patrick as we were traveling around the California coast this morning. He said things are beginning to ease up a little bit. We're able to bring in more postdocs. We're able to turn more term positions into permanent, and that's helpful, and that's related to the budget, but we certainly don't make it easy. On the oil and gas unconventional side, I'm just going to quickly say that I work in lockstep with Gina McCarthy and Ernie Moniz, in particular, Department of Energy and the EPA. The 3 of us are working on climate issues. We're working on methane issues. We're talking about conventional, unconventional oil and gas and other forms of energy, and been out to NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. We are working together in I think, a very important way. We also work with the Office of Science and Technology Policy and other parts of the federal family. So we regularly, as cabinet members, get together to talk about how we can collaborate and cooperate and make sure that we're knocking down those silos and barriers between our agencies.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Susan Huff. I'm a seismologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm happy to work for you. With my colleague Tom Pratt, we actually installed that seismometer that you mentioned, so I hope it's working well and not in your way. I have a quick question about something you touched on, the regulation pertaining to travel by federal scientists to scientific conferences. And among the rank and file, there's a sense that scientific conferences maybe got caught in the crossfire when the administration moved to have more oversight over federal over participation in conferences. And I just wondered if you see any prospect for that to improve. So you're right, it did get caught in the crossfire. And I've talked a lot with Suzette about this. The president had to do some things fast around the budget,
And of course, there were some bad examples of conference use that everybody got kind of tarred with the same brush. And this gets to, you are penalized for taking risk or stepping out in the federal family, and everybody gets tarred with a rule. And no question that the USGS and many of our scientists got caught in that crossfire. Yes, I think there is an opportunity to relax some of those rules, but I'd also say that, for the attendance at AGU, I had to sign off on that. As soon as that hits my desk, it's gone. I'm not going to be able to slow down. The people that work for us, in the organization know that as well. So we will work around it to make sure that it doesn't impede scientific collaboration. But I also think that it painted things with a broad brush, and that's inappropriate, because these kinds of gatherings are incredibly important to furthering scientific knowledge. So thanks.
Over here.
And thanks for the seismograph.
Quick questions.
Thank you. Bob Goff, I'm the Secretary of the InterTribal Council on Utility Policy, maybe the only tribal rep here. We'd certainly like to see more tribal youth involved in the sciences, and I appreciate the Science Climate Center liaison positions for tribes. That's going to make a big difference. And the support that they've brought to tribes and tribal communities working on these climate issues, particularly the Rising Voices gathering that is coming through NCAR. I've got a couple of things, and I'd be happy to just leave you with the letter about it. But the critical issue coming to Indian country this week, this month, this year, is the KXL pipeline coming through, at least the permits in South Dakota that have not had tribal input for the protection of resources, while at the same time bringing the fuse to the largest carbon bomb in North America. You will be getting a resolution from tribes seeking your consultation with tribes on that permit and the changes that have gone in since 2009. So that's heads up number one. And congratulations elsewhere on the work that your office has been able to provide for adaptation assistance to indigenous America with your responsibilities to Pacific Islanders as well as Native Americans and Alaskans. Thank you.
And I have been on record that as the Keystone XL pipeline is considered, that we will that there are very important messages I've received from tribes in the area. Just drop it there, we'll pick it up. From the NCAI and others. So it is very important that we do tribal consultation, and committed to making sure that that happens. I'll also say that in the realm of complexity, we now have trains running through critical habitats and communities that are full of volatiles like crude oil. We have trucks doing the same thing. It is a very, very difficult and frightening time for the environment with the way we are moving oil around. So all of that stuff has to factor in. Tribal consultation will be very important, and I'm going to make sure that the State Department knows that, as well as our elected officials know that. Thank you.
Our last question, right from here.
Hi, Secretary Jewell. My name is Joan Marie Del Vecchio, and I'm in my 4th year of undergrad. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice for maybe some of the young scientists in the audience who are very eager to apply their scientific curiosity and eagerness for research for the public good. So do you have any advice for young folks like us?
Yes. I would say work this crowd really hard. They have internships. They probably would love to convince you to look at their graduate school programs. What's that?
Put her on a committee.
Oh, she's going to put you on a committee for the AGU. Getting out and networking is what this is all about, and sharing knowledge and information and being visible. There was an article in the Washington Post last week that talked about that young people just didn't have any interest in public service, and that is just dead wrong. I have met so many young people that aspire to do the kind of work of the people in this room, whether it's in federal government service or in service through the university environment and otherwise, and we are hungry for your engagement, and I would just say, get involved. Sign up for things, do internships, paid or unpaid, whatever you can afford. You don't have to live on much. You can get by with a little. That's right. REI clothes last a long time. You can buy them used. Sleep in a tent. But I would say take advantage of the people that are here to pursue those opportunities. And as I mentioned, it's not easy to get hired by the federal government because we make it difficult, but tenacity pays off because there are incredible jobs that are out there for the taking across the landscape. So what you're doing by being here is great, and as you finish up your undergraduate and decide what to do next, like go to work as I did, or go to school as pretty much everybody in the room here did, just bear in mind that the kind of experiences you get will shape what you're able to do as a human being, and that's certainly been true for me, and I know it'll be true for you. So she's right over there. She's looking for an internship or opportunities. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Secretary Jewell.